me when you see me come and make some room.
Everywhere I go, I'm in the spotlight. This is a good life. I'm living bold. This is what it looks like on the tick-tick top of the world.
It's that time again. It's the Captain's Log edition, where we take inventory of hot topics that have happened recently in the news. So since we covered the Pacific Maritime Association and the International Longshore Warehouse Union contract negotiations and the historical relationship last week in the rebroadcast, it made sense to take inventory of stories we may have missed. Hi, welcome to By Land and By Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by me. I'm Lauren Began, founder of the Maritime Professor and Squall Strategies, and I'm your favorite maritime attorney. Join me every week as we walk through both ocean transport and surface transport topics in the wild world of supply chain. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice, and there's no attorney-client privilege created by this video. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. All right, so let's get into it. We're just going to go through a whole bunch of stories, a whole bunch of different media, trade press stories that we've seen today, different updates that I'd like to kind of cover. Again, this is the Captain's Log Hot Topics edition. So story number one, usually we go through our top 3 stories of the week. This week, they're all top stories. So story number one, we're still on the watch for language for a new supplemental call for comments with the unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations. This is the first of the rulemakings that we've been watching out of the Federal Maritime Commission. It was set to be concluded December 16th, which was 6 months after the signing of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. It has not come out yet. They didn't conclude, but what they said was some of the comments that they got were so thoughtful and really brought up some interesting points that they didn't feel comfortable turning over a final rule without going through another round of comments for some of the issues that were brought up. Some of these issues were the documented export strategy. Some of the comments were, what does that mean? Is this an actual documented strategy that we need to file with the FMC now? Or is this just a general sense of business decisions and business movement? Also, there were some questions on the threshold for, is it just one criteria that the FMC is considering, or is it multiple criteria for unreasonableness, for this unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate, potentially proposing elements and more specificity around the elements of considerations for the carriers in apparent unreasonableness to negotiate. Lots of questions that were really, like I said, very thoughtful and thought-provoking. And so, you know what? Chairman Dan Maffei of the Federal Maritime Commission addressed the tardiness of the final text, but he said, look, getting it right is more important than getting it fast. I tend to agree. I think they're doing a good thing here, but we're still waiting on this language. Again, we have 3 rules that we're watching. We are watching the unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations. That's the one we're talking about here. We have detention, demurrage, prohibited practices, and billing invoices. That's something that they had 183 comments filed. It closed up the end of December. I don't think we're going to see anything until, if we see something in March, that's amazing. I'm guessing at least April. Again, they need to close that one up by June 16th, which would be 1 year past the Ocean Shipping Reform Act signing date. But getting it right is more important than getting it fast. So there were a lot of things covered in the D&D detention, demurrage, prohibited practices rule. I don't know. I think they could still make that deadline. And then the third rulemaking that we have not seen any language out on is unfair, unjustly discriminatory methods. I think this is one that a lot of shippers are watching. There's been a few different areas that the FMC has kind of indicated that they might be moving with this, I guess, maybe reading between the lines, trying to kind of read some tea leaves here. But I think basically, as we've seen across the board, the Federal Maritime Commission just wants to make sure that it's a fair, efficient movement of goods in the ocean shipping world. And so that's where we're at. I think that will lead the day on this unfair, unjustly discriminatory methods rulemaking. I'm just so interested to see the language that comes out of that. So we're still on rule watch for all of those. So story number 2, speaking of the Pacific Maritime Association and the International Longshore Warehouse Union, they released a joint statement just this week. Maybe they watch by land and by sea, and so they thought, oh, they're covering it. Maybe we should address this. I doubt it. Maybe, you never know, maybe. So in this announcement, and they certainly didn't address anything that we covered. Last week, we, as you recall, if you watch the show or listen to the show on the podcast, we did a rebroadcast of the Pacific Maritime Association and the International Longshore Warehouse Union. We had previously covered that last May, talking about just that the contract was expiring, talking a little bit about that, but moreover, talking about the history of the relationship between the two and how previous negotiations have gone. So we did a rebroadcast of it just last week because I thought, you know what, it's been a while. It was starting to kind of get a little what's going on with the negotiations. So I thought it was a perfect time to do that rebroadcast. And so just yesterday, they released a joint statement about their negotiations. So in the announcement, they said that they actually continue to negotiate and remain hopeful of reaching a deal soon, which is great language, right? We all hope they reach a deal soon. They also continued and said the parties have agreed not to discuss negotiations in the media as collective bargaining continues. Okay, so they're kind of letting everyone know that what's in those negotiations are staying in the negotiations. So they continue. Negotiations began on Tuesday, May 10th, 2022, and the parties have reached a tentative agreement on certain key issues. That's great to hear, right? Some of the things they said were including health benefits, and they remained committed to resolving remaining issues as expeditiously as possible. That's great. And health benefits was one of the major things that we were kind of anticipating was one of the issues. There's also been some talk of jurisdictional things, maybe Oakland, Seattle, but who knows? Because what they continue to say is talks are continuing on an ongoing basis until an agreement is reached. But here's where it really got kind of interesting and maybe a little pointed. They said negotiations are not open to the media or the public, and news articles purporting to know what is happening at the bargaining table are speculative at best. During negotiations, West Coast ports have continued to operate. That's interesting, right? I found that interesting that they put that language in there. There certainly has been speculation on how the negotiations are going and how long they might continue to go. I kind of like that they hit it right on the head and said, look, nobody knows but us, and it takes as long as it takes. Okay, got it. So, I've even, like I said, read that jurisdictional issues over Seattle, and I think Oakland was mixed in there too, maybe that wasn't ever an issue, right? I don't know. That's what they're saying is that any sort of reporting out was speculative. So we'll see. I just kind of like the spice there. But overall, I mean, spice means drama, and really we just want a negotiation. We want this to come to a conclusion. I think both parties, probably more than anybody else, want this to come to a conclusion. So hopefully we can get there soon. All right, story number 3. This week, FreightWaves held their Global Supply Chain Week, and on Tuesday, it was Maritime Day. And one of the interviews that I found really interesting was that of Peter Friedman of AgTC, Agriculture Transportation Coalition. So in that interview, he talked about the potential of an OSRA 2.0 or a second follow-on Ocean Shipping Reform Act. And let me just kind of preface this and kind of get into the weeds here. So the Ocean Shipping Reform Act that came about June 16th, 2022, if we want to get really technical about it, technically was a 2.0 because remember, there was an Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 1998. And the original, and all of this Ocean Shipping Reform Act, what it's reforming is the Shipping Act of 1984. So that's the original document. And then 1998 came along and reformed the 1984 document. And then again, we had in 2022 a reform of, I guess it was the 98 version, but also ultimately pushing back to the 1984 version. And so now there's talk of another Ocean Shipping Reform Act. So they're saying 2.0 because that's recent memory, but really, I mean, it's probably like a 3.0 if we're being technical about it. Either way, it looks like we are maybe in the works. There's in the works for a Ocean Shipping Reform Act of maybe 2023, maybe it doesn't get pushed to 2024. I don't know how long or the appetite kind of politically there would be for another Ocean Ship Reform Act, but maybe there would be. So he talked about that, and he talked about the potential for that, and that there's talks continuing. But one thing that I found very interesting was he brought up one of the things that might potentially be part of those discussions is FMC, the Federal Maritime Commission's inability to deny alliances. I've been talking about this quite a bit, that the FMC does not have the ability to deny or approve, really, alliances. Basically, the agreement is filed with the Federal Maritime Commission, and 45 days later, it automatically goes into effect. And so there's ways of stopping it, but I mean, they're pretty high bars to get over. And so really the only way that the FMC can directly stop an agreement after it's been filed is to file an injunction in court, in federal court, to stop it. So that's a pretty big hill for something so important. And that's even if like the agreement is just terribly presented, right? I mean, maybe it's a 90% market share, and they're saying, nope, you got to, you know, the FMC's like, there's no way we would ever approve this, and there it is. So historically, and we've talked a little bit about alliances, but previously there was an alliance proposed. It was the P3, and it was denied by Chinese authorities because it had too high of a market share. FMC doesn't really have that ability, like I said, to deny alliances, and that's oversimplifying kind of the back and forth there. But basically, another global agency was able to deny it, and that's a big thing, that the FMC just doesn't have that ability. So I don't know. We'll see. So Commissioner Bensel and Commissioner Vekich have actually talked about this previously, saying, and they actually put out a letter to Congress where they were talking about how they don't have that ability. And so what they talked about in that letter is that they would like to modify the process by which the Commission reviews agreements and strengthen the Commission's oversight of potentially anti-competitive agreements, saying, we believe that the Commission should have the authority to disapprove agreements between or among ocean common carriers and marine terminal operators. Experience has shown that this process is cumbersome and time-consuming, and would even argue that it's designed to impede the Commission's oversight of agreements. Like I said, in the Ocean Ship Reform Act of 1998, there was a deregulation movement that was happening there. This might have kind of been in that, but really what it does now is, now that alliances and these agreements these vessel sharing agreements are kind of so prevalent and people aren't really afraid of them, although there was some bad press about them, they're I would say unfairly so. I would say that this is something that's so important. It's just an important check, right? There's 5 commissioners that would have to majority agree to deny an agreement anyway. So there's going to be that kind of coming together moment. But to not have that ability, that's a big deal. So hopefully Peter Friedman and the rest of anybody who might be negotiating Ocean Ship Reform Act 3.0, as we'll call it, 2023 or maybe 2024. We'll keep that in mind. I think that might be a low-hanging fruit, but we'll see. All right, so story number 4. Maersk is suing Evergreen over the Suez Canal grounding. So this article came out of G-Captain, originally coming from Reuters, on February 13th. And so I went on the FreightWaves Roundtable with Dr. Sal Mercogliano. You probably know him. He has a great video broadcast, What's Going On with Shipping, and Bill Priestley, who's the host of the FreightWaves Roundtable. We went on and discussed it a few days after that report came out. But I don't think I ever brought it up here, and so I wanted to make sure that we talked about it. So we all remember the Ever Given, right? It got stuck in the Suez for about 6 days in 2021. All of a sudden, the whole world knew that these large vessels traverse the world, and hopefully they might have learned that 90% of everything moves by ocean shipping, ocean transport. I don't know. Maybe only a few people learned that, but that's a few more than previous. So the Ever Given got stuck. And so Maersk was actually the next ship in line behind the Ever Given. So the Ever Given was stuck for 6 days. And so it was the Maersk Denver, which was actually a U.S. flag container ship, part of the U.S. Maritime Security Program, that was stuck behind it. And actually it was kind of a feat that they were able to stop in time before hitting the Ever Given. So hats off to the Maris Denver for being able to maneuver and stop in time. So if you do watch Dr. Mercogliano's show, What's Going On with Shipping, he let us know that the Suez Canal Authority never actually released a post-action report. And so it got me thinking, maybe that's part of the legal strategy here to actually force that report. So general average was declared on the Ever Given, and so the splitting of the losses between all invested parties equally, which is the basic definition of general average, is ongoing and maybe even getting close to concluding, and maybe it actually has concluded. But perhaps that's the strategy here, right? So if it's found that someone or something specifically was liable, maybe that could open up more opportunities for those that shared in the losses to recover some of those, so that they're not as beholden to paying for some of those losses. Just speculation, right? And since the losses, so in general, losses from delays are not part of what general average can cover. So maybe that's what the lawsuit by Maersk is trying to recover, this additional cost that they had to bear by being stuck right behind the Ever Given and essentially, the last ship that was able to come out of the queue. Although I don't think they did come out of the queue, but so I don't know. My hunch is that we may see a post-action report. I think that that's probably the legal strategy here, right? That they were forcing the issue, and through this lawsuit that was filed in Danish courts, it may force a post-action report to come out of the Suez Canal Authority, which will illuminate what happened, right? And maybe even open up additional legal avenues of who did what, and maybe who might be at fault, or maybe a few who's might be at fault. So we'll see. I think it's interesting from a legal kind of strategy and legal, from a legal perspective, it's pretty interesting. So story number 5. This next story, we switch over to surface transport. So Back the Truck Up, an offshoot of FreightWaves and What the Truck, reported recent results from a FreightWaves survey showing that a third of respondents showing that a third of respondents would exit trucking if market upturn doesn't happen in the second half. So 35% of self-identified owner-operators said that they plan to exit the industry if the market does not take an upswing in the second half of 2023. And the story actually talks about how truckers are having trouble finding haulage. So they also said just over 7.5% would say that they would actually consider signing on to a larger carrier. So we're having about 7.5% saying that they would recycle in the industry, but 35% saying that they would just exit. That's a big deal. This story actually reported that while owner-operator salaries are up about $16,000, which is up $224,000 up to $240,000 as kind of a general salary, their expenditures, owner-operator expenditures, actually increased 22.9%, which is not what that $16,000 represents. Most of these expenditures, as you can imagine, fuel, payroll, and maintenance. So we've talked about the previous kind of inaccurate reporting of a driver shortage, saying that it's not actually a shortage, but a movement of drivers in the industry from kind of a sometimes untenable situation. How the experience for the driver is not that great sometimes. But this 35%, this would be an actual driver shortage, and this would have major supply chain ramifications. We'll see what happens. And it was just a survey, so maybe that 35%, the accuracy of those who would leave, is lower. Maybe they were trying to say that to make a point, but we'll see. So story number 6. The Federal Trade Commission is continuing to review commentary on the proposed rule to ban non-compete clauses. We've talked about these non-compete clauses before, and Matthew Leffler is covering this closely, so I recommend following him if you want to stay up to date on the Federal Trade Commission activities as it relates to this non-compete clauses ban proposed rule that they've come out with. So we covered the Federal Trade Commission and the rule in a little more depth previously here on By Land and By Sea. What we did was we kind of explained who the FTC is, the Federal Trade Commission, and how they compare to maybe other independent regulatory commissions that we're familiar with, the FMC being kind of the most notable that we talk about here. Their proposed rule is open for comments currently, and that comment submission period will close March 20th, 2023. So if you do feel strongly, get your comments in and be part of the process, right? Anybody can file comments, anybody, companies, individuals. So if you feel strongly, let them know, kind of just either tell them what has happened to you, tell them what has happened to your company. They want to know like how this rule would affect the industry in a real world scenario. So on February 16th, the FTC actually held a hearing about the proposed rule to ban non-competes. It was recorded, and I say hearing, it was kind of like a webinar broadcast, but it's a hearing. It was recorded, so you can actually watch the playback to catch up. I really like watching these hearings sometimes when it comes to these rules because you get some of the like nuances of these rules, and you get to hear from the commissioners, and certainly some of the industry was part of that. We had the freight industry represented as well. So something to consider. I think that this is important to keep an eye on. So that's it. Since we covered the Pacific Maritime Association and the International Longshore Warehouse Union last week and the rebroadcast, it really did make sense to take inventory of stories that we may have missed. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice directly related to your matter. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. But if you do have specific legal questions, feel free to reach out to me at my legal company, Squall Strategies. Otherwise, for the non-legal questions, the e-learning, and general industry information and insights, come find me at the Maritime Professor. If you like these videos, let me know. Comment, like, and share. If you want to listen to these episodes on demand, or if you missed any previous episodes, check out the podcast By Land and by Sea. If you prefer to see the video, they live on my YouTube page, By Land and by Sea, presented by the Maritime Professor. And while you're at it, check out our website, themaritimeprofessor.com. E-courses dropping soon. So until next week, this is Lauren Began, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and by Sea. See you next time.